after every now and then the call is getting disconnected. So, okay, let's begin this chapter. We were talking of the architecture as power. So, we talked of that in the 8th to 18th century, the monuments and the buildings which were built, we will deal about them in detail. Okay, so now we first come on to the structures which were built. The structures were either palaces, gardens, tombs, etc., or they were the temples and bazaars which were built. Now, then they talk of the early medieval period in North India, the style in which the temples were built at this time. Now, they tell us that the most prevalent style in the northern part of India, while these temples were being constructed, was called the Nagara style. Okay, was the Nagara style in which the temples were built. Now, what is the Nagara style? It was basically divided into three: the Shikhara, that is the topmost peak of the temple, and it was a beehived structure. That means it was in a kind of an inverted beehive, and it was surrounded. There were no enclosures. They were only built up on a raised platform at that time. So the Nagara style had three common features: the Shikhara, then the second was the Garbhagriha, and the third was the Mandapa. Okay, so now they talk of the Shikhara, means the highest point on the top, the apex of the temple. This area was a beehive structure. Then they talk of the passage, the gateway, or the mandapa, and then they talked of the inner shrine where the deities were kept. That was known as Garbhagriha. Clear? Now this we had done till the examples which were covered: the Kandariya Mahadeva temple, the Vishwanath temple, and the Paraswanath temple. These were built in the Nagara style, and they have been given as the prominent styles of the North India. Now, most of the temples were built by the Chandela rulers. Among them were the Khajuraho temple, the Kandariya Mahadeva temple, etc. They have given you the name of the king also, Gangadeva of Chandela dynasty, who had built the Kandariya Mahadeva temple, and it was dedicated to Lord Shiva. Clear? Most of the temples at this time were either dedicated to Lord Vishnu or Lord Shiva. Now, till here we had done yesterday. Now, moving on further, we come on to the latest one, the South India. Now, the temples built in South India followed the Dravidian style. Underline this. The temples built in North India had the Nagara style. The temples in South India were built in the Dravidian style. Please underline this. Now, what is Dravidian style? Let's see this. In the Dravidian style, the Vimana of the temple was pyramidical in shape. Vimana means the Shikhara they are talking of. And if you can see this particular, where is it? Yeah, they were in a Vimana. Vimana of the temple was pyramidical. Pyramidical means in a shape of a pyramid. That means a triangular structure was there. Clear? And they were built in pyramidical structures. So, in shape. It was composed of a series of layers that tapered as they ascended. Can you see the tapering layer? That means it was in a kind of a CD kind of a structure. Can you see? They are turning to a peak as they are coming on top. There are different stages in which these structures are made. Can you see? So this was the Dravidian style. Yeah. Now the temples had an enclosure and a gateway called Gopuram. Now these also had Gopuram. These had Vimana instead of Shikhara, and these had enclosures. The northern temples did not had any enclosures, whereas they had enclosures. Now the temple had many stories, each of which is smaller than the one below. So since they are tapering at the top, so they had stories built, and each story was in a lesser space than the one below it. Okay. The South Indian style is best exemplified in the temples built by the Pallavas, Pandyas, and the Cholas. Underline the kings, the Pandyas, the Pallavas, and the Cholas. These were the South kings who built these temples. Now we'll take up the headings, the temples which were made by the Pallava kings. Let us see. The best example of the Pallava architecture are the rock cut temples at Mahabalipuram. Please underline this, rock cut temples. That means they were built out of huge rocks. The rocks were cut, and Mahabalipuram temples are the best examples of the Dravidian style temples in the south built by the Pallava rulers. Mind you, the Pallava rulers built it. Just as the northern temples were most of the time were major rulers who built them were the Chandelas. Here it is the Pallavas, Cholas, and Pandyas. So here first we are dealing with the Pallavas. So the Mahabali temples. Then the Kasinath, sorry, the Kailashnath temple, underline it, of Kachipuram. Now, where is it? Kachipuram, underline it, has a huge temple complex with a towered sanctuary and mandapa. The Pallavas also built the Ratha temple, underline the Ratha temple, and the Shore temple, underline the Shore temple at Mahabalipuram. So most of the Mahabalipuram temples were built by Pallavas. Mahabalipuram is the name of a place, and the temples built here were built by the Pallava rulers. The prominent among them were the Ratha temple and the Shore temple. Then they are telling you the Kailashnath temple at Kachipuram is also a huge temple which is built in a large area with proper enclosures and mandapas. Then they talk of the Cholas. Let's see, the Chola kings. During the rule of the Cholas, temple architecture in the south reached its zenith. That means peak. Under the Chola kings, they were master builders of temples, and the building of temples reached its peak, its zenith. The Chola kings were great temple builders. The money obtained through donations was used for construction and maintenance of temples. Underline the Brihadeshwara temple, which is also known as Rajarajeshwara temple, was built at Tanjore. Please underline the place. It was dedicated to Shiva, underline Shiva, was built by Raja Raja Chola in the 11th century. So, in the early medieval period, the Raja Raja Chola was this is the name of the king, Raja Raja Chola. He was the king of the Chola dynasty. He built up the Brihadeshwara temple, which was also known as Raja Rajeshwara temple. It was the tallest, sorry, it had the tallest shikhara amongst temples of its time. The 90-ton stones for the top of the shikhara was too heavy to lift manually as there were no cranes in those days. Therefore, the architects built an inclined path of 4 kilometers to the top of the temple, placed the boulders on the rollers, and rolled it up all the way to the top of the temple. The inclined path was dismantled after the temple was constructed. So now listen to it. Since these temples were built out of huge rocks, they were rock cut temples. So in those times, it is such a huge 90-ton structure. Stone it was, 90-ton. So nobody could carry it on top and build the shikhara. So inclined path was made. That means just next to that rock, a path was made going in an inclined way. Inclined way, you know, the slides that you have, in that kind of a way, a sliding path was made, and the stones were rolled up to that top of the rock, and then gradually the construction of the temple took place. And once the temple was completed, this side path was dismantled, उसको remove कर दिया गया था, ठीक है? Early Chola temples were simple structures. In the later period, temples became bigger and grander. The gateway of the temple was called the Gopuram. Now, here also, the gateway was called the Gopuram. The main shrine was called the Garbhagriha. Now, again, it was known as the Garbhagriha. The top of the main shrine had a tall structure called Shikhara. Now, again, they had these three things, the Gopuram, Garbhagriha, and Shikhara, as in the northern temples. Yeah? Okay. Can you see this picture? Just raise your thumb, I will be able to know. Can you see the picture here?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So another structure in
Yes,
front of the
yes,
main
ma'am.
shrine is Mandapa. Now, the Chola temples were just not religious centers, they were also political, cultural, and educational centers. Temples also functioned as schools. Festivals were celebrated in the temple courtyards. So now, as you know, the temples were not just the places of worship, but they were also the places where cultural activities took place, and a lot of uh, get-togethers were held. The festivals were celebrated. They were also centers of education where the schools were held. The festivals were celebrated in and around these temples. Okay. Now, the temples of the Chola period were very rich. The revenue obtained from land went to the temples. Kings also granted land to temples. So now the main source why these temples were so lavish, because the kings, especially the Chola kings of the south, they dedicated all their power and energy in building up the temples. And whatever money they got, the funds they received, they simply used it for construction of these temples. Clear? Now, significance of building monuments. So, why were the monuments built? What is the significance? What is the use of building the monuments? Now let's see this. Temples and mosques were beautifully built because they were places of worship. They were meant to demonstrate the power, wealth, and devotion of the patron. So now, firstly, they were built. Temples were built because they were the places of worship. Apart from worship, they were the sources through which the king could show their power. The more enormous and huge the temple was, it showed that yes, the king was very powerful. So, and it could have more patrons. Patrons means the one who could worship. So they were the devotion of the patron. Then an inscription mentioned that Raja Rajeshwara temple was built by King Raja Raja Deva Chola for the worship of God Raja Rajeshwaram. So see, even the inscriptions were made. That means a written note was also put up that this temple is built by Raja Rajeshwara and Raja Raja Deva. It was built by Raja Raja Deva, and the temple's name was Raja Rajeshwara, and it was dedicated to Raja Rajeshwaram. That means the Shiva. The king took the god's name as it was auspicious, as and he wanted to appear like God. Now, most of the time, the king took the god's name only. Okay, whatever the name of the god was. Like, see here, Raja Rajeshwaram temple it was, and the king's name was Raja Raja Deva. So they took the name of the king of the god. so that they could appear like God and people should know the power and prestige. The temple was a miniature model of the world ruled by the king and his allies. The largest temples were all constructed by kings and lesser deities were deities of kings, allies, and subordinates. So basically, the deities were the gods, and then there were small structures and photos or maybe statues built for the kings also, representing who made this particular temple. And here in the above picture, you can see the Raja Rajeshwara temple at Tanjore. See how huge and vast it is, how beautifully constructed it is. Yeah. So these were the reasons why the temples were made at that time. Let's see further. By building temples and mosques, kings and sultans emphasized their moral right to be rulers, as they thus proclaimed their close relationship with God. So now why they built temples and mosques? The kings built so because they wanted to proclaim themselves as the rulers next to God, and they could be regarded by people as supreme powers. Then many sultans built tanks and reservoirs for the use of people. Apart from temples, the welfare structures were also made like the tanks. Now, these huge tanks could hold water, and that water was supplied as a source to various parts in the kingdom. So these reservoirs and water tanks were used to help the people for their Iltutmish won universal respect for building a large reservoir out Dilli e Kuhna. Please underline Dilli e Kuhna, called Hauz e Sultani, the name of the tank or the reservoir which Iltutmish built. Underline Iltutmish also. It was Hauz e Sultani. Sometimes temples, mosques, and gurdwaras also had tanks and reservoirs. And the biggest example is the Golden Temple. Can you see the Golden? It was a Sikh monument in Amritsar, and it had a reservoir, water preserving area. Now, why temples were destroyed? Reasons why the temples were destroyed. Whenever kings attacked the neighboring areas, their main target used to be the temples and mosques because kings built temples to demonstrate their devotion to God and riches. So now, the reason why the temples and mosques were destroyed in the previous times, because whenever another king came to overpower the particular kingdom, he first attacked the temples of those kingdoms because those temples were the symbols of the king's strength and riches. So that is the reason why the temples were destroyed and attacked. Now the first daughter in the ninth Pandya kings, the Sri Mara Sri Vallabha, underline Sri Mara Sri Vallabha, attacked Sri Lanka and, and defeated King Sena I. He also seized the golden image of Buddha and removed all valuable jewels kept in various monasteries. The next Sihalesa king, underline Sihalesa king Sena II, ordered his general to invade Madurai, underline Madurai. He found and restored the gold statue of Buddha. So now King Sena I, he attacked the temple and took away the image, the golden image of Buddha. Later on, Sinhalesa, king of Sena II, he attacked Madurai and he reinvaded and took the statue of Buddha back. So now these were the attacks which were showing that whichever king wanted to create his power first attacked the temples. Second Jota. In the 11th century, the Chola king Rajendra I, underline Chola king, underline Rajendra, built a Shiva temple in his capital. in his capital and the prized statues he had acquired from his various attacks on neighboring kingdoms. It included the sun pedestal from the Chalukyas, underlined sun pedestal Chalukyas, a Ganesha statue, underlined Ganesha statue, and many Durga statues, a Nandi statue of the Chalukyas. So all these were taken away by the Chola kings. An image of Bhairavi, that is Lord Shiva, a Bhairavi from the Kalinga of Orissa, and Kali statue from the Palas of Bengal. So please underline these things which were taken away. Kali statue, Kalinga, and these were all taken from Palas of Bengal. So this was the theme. They took away the statues. Then third Jota, during his various campaigns in India, Muhammad Ghazni, underlined Mahmud of Ghazni, Mahmud of Ghazni attacked the temples and looted their wealth and idols. By destroying temples, he tried to win credit as a great hero of Islam. In the political culture of the Middle Ages, most rulers displayed their might and military success by attacking and looting the temples of worship of the defeated rulers. The main theme was to show the downfall of a particular ruler. The powerful king first attacked the temples. Is this much clear till here, children? So basically,
Yes, ma'am.
it was just
Ma'am.
because okay. So it was basically just because to show their power and prestige, all this was done. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.